What if the universe is silent because anything that makes noise doesn't survive? Imagine the loudest, most cataclysmic event you can possibly comprehend. Billions of stars are burning, dying, and violently colliding across the cosmos, but none of them are calling out. The real fear isn't just that we might be alone in the dark. It is the creeping realization that the silence of the cosmos is not an accident. It is a fundamental law of reality, and everyone else might be staying quiet on purpose. Let us travel back to the fundamental mechanics of our universe to understand the terrifying cognitive dissonance of this silence. Approximately 13.8 billion years ago, time, space, matter, and energy burst into existence from a single infinitely dense point. For billions of years since that moment, the cosmos has been a cauldron of unimaginable violence and chaotic transformation. To truly grasp the horror of cosmic silence, you must first visualize the sheer scale of the violence occurring within it. Imagine a massive star, hundreds of times larger than our own sun, reaching the absolute end of its life cycle. For millions of years, it has burned hot and fast, sustaining itself through a delicate balance of nuclear fusion pushing outward and its own immense gravity pulling inward. But suddenly, it exhausts its nuclear fuel. In a fraction of a second, the delicate balance is broken, and the core collapses under its own staggering weight. The outer layers of the star crash inward at a significant fraction of the speed of light, hit the hyperdense core, and rebound in a shockwave that tears the entire star apart. This is a supernova, an explosion so unimaginably powerful that it unleashes more energy in a single moment than our sun will produce in its entire 10 billion year lifespan, seeding the dark void with heavy elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron. Now imagine that you are there. You are suspended in the infinite void, floating safely just outside the blast radius of this dying star. The visual spectacle in front of you is blinding and absolute. You see a shockwave of hyperheated plasma and deadly radiation tearing through the fabric of space. You watch as millions of miles of stellar material are violently ripped apart, expelled into the dark at thousands of miles per second, reshaping the galaxy itself. But as this apocalypse unfolds right in front of your eyes, what do you hear? Absolutely nothing. Not a whisper, not a low rumble, not the faintest crackle of energy. Even a supernova, one of the most violent, catastrophic, and energetic events in the entire cosmos, appears to your senses as a perfectly, chillingly silent flash of light. This introduces a terrifying biological paradox. Space is not just silent, it is an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human perception. On Earth, we are entirely conditioned to associate immense energy with deafening sound. Our evolutionary history has wired our brains over millions of years to expect a direct, undeniable correlation between visual violence and acoustic feedback. When a lightning bolt strikes the ground, we instinctively brace for the earth-shaking boom of thunder. When a volcano erupts, we anticipate a roar that shakes the very bones in our bodies. Sound, for humans, is a tactile experience. It is a physical wave of compressed air that travels through the atmosphere, striking our eardrums and sending electrical signals to our auditory processing centres to confirm that the chaotic event we are seeing is actually real and happening. But space entirely rejects this biological requirement. Sound requires particles to travel. It needs a physical medium, like the dense air of our atmosphere or the water in our oceans, to carry the vibration from its source to an observer. Our home, Earth, is a rare cosmic anomaly, a safe haven wrapped in a thick, vibrating blanket of atmospheric gases. Down here on the surface, even when you sit in an empty room, the world hums with the subtle vibrations of air molecules shifting winds, and distant human activity, you are never truly in silence. But the vast, sprawling expanse of the cosmos is a near-perfect vacuum. In the incredibly vast spaces between the stars, the density of matter drops to about 1 single atom per cubic centimetre. That is an emptiness so profound, so absolute, that our most advanced state-of-the-art vacuum chambers on Earth cannot even begin to replicate it. Because there is no medium to carry the vibration, the universe executes its most destructive acts in dead silence. Explosions produce no audible sound, and entire planetary collisions are visually spectacular but acoustically non-existent. Consider the sheer, terrifying scale of the objects lurking in this silent void. Take the supermassive black hole known as TUN 618. This is not just a point of darkness. It is a gravitational monster 66 billion times larger than our own Sun. It is an object so incomprehensibly massive that 11 of our entire solar systems could fit side by side inside of it. When a black hole of this staggering magnitude consumes a stray star, it literally tears the star apart at the atomic level, accelerating gas and plasma to near the speed of light and violently spitting out ripples of energy that push around nearby gases. The forces at play are enough to warp the very fabric of space and time. Yet, if you were hovering right outside its event horizon, watching entire star systems being shredded into subatomic dust, the universe would offer you no auditory warning whatsoever. We can look closer to home to find equally horrifying examples of this silent violence. Imagine floating above the exoplanet Gliese 436b, a world roughly the size of Neptune that orbits a mere 2.5 million miles away from its host star. The surface temperature is a blistering 882 degrees Fahrenheit, yet due to the immense gravitational pull of its core, the water on the surface cannot evaporate, creating a hellscape covered in literal burning ice. Or imagine drifting past HD 189733b, a planet where the wind speeds are incomparably faster than any hurricane on Earth, and where the atmosphere rains literal jagged glass horizontally at supersonic speeds. Or picture the hauntingly massive exoplanet J1407b, a celestial body 10 times the size of Jupiter, featuring a ring system 150 million kilometres across, rings so gargantuan that they span the entire distance between the Earth and the Sun. If you were suspended in the vacuum of space beside any of these hostile worlds, you would witness storms larger than continents, rings made of millions of pulverized asteroids grinding against each other, and atmospheric chaos that defies human comprehension. But your ears would be met with an oppressive, suffocating nothingness. The silence in space is not merely the absence of sound, but the total absence of any medium to carry vibration. This is the silent violence of the cosmos, and it triggers a deep primal unease within us. We have psychological terms for our ingrained fears of the universe. Astrophobia is the deep dread of space and celestial bodies, while astromegalophobia is the specific terror of unimaginably large objects in space. We look at gas giants like Jupiter with its great red spot, a raging storm twice the size of Earth that has been churning for 3.5 centuries, and we feel deeply intimidated. We imagine falling into its heavy, toxic atmosphere, descending endlessly into the crushing pressure without ever hitting a solid surface. But what truly amplifies these phobias is the context of the void itself. These colossal, menacing worlds exist in a pitch-black abyss, separated by vast, incomprehensible distances, and operating in a vacuum that entirely mutes their fury. When we think of sensory deprivation on Earth, we primarily think of darkness, as humans, roughly 30% of our brain is completely dedicated to processing visual information, more than any other sense we possess. We navigate our environments, read emotions, identify threats, and orient ourselves entirely through sight. Take away visual input, and we become instantly disoriented, losing our primary means of understanding the world around us. But the absolute absence of sound in a visually overwhelming environment is arguably much more terrifying because it shatters our fundamental sense of reality. When astronauts step out of the safety of their spacecraft for an untethered spacewalk, they are violently confronted with this hostile paradox. They look down at Earth and see a tiny, fragile blue marble suspended in an infinite sea of black. This staggering sight often triggers what is known as the overview effect, a profound psychological shift characterized by a complete loss of ego, an intense awareness of human fragility, and overwhelming philosophical reflection. But while their eyes are taking in the entire planet, every ocean, every continent, the sum total of human history floating silently in the void, their ears receive nothing. The vacuum outside their helmet is a total dead zone. The silence they experience is not merely a lack of noise, it is a heavy, almost physical entity that rapidly isolates the mind. This absolute acoustic isolation introduces the horrifying, deeply unsettling psychological concept of sensory void collapse. Because human biology evolved over millions of years in terrestrial environments saturated with constant ambient sound, a sudden plunge into a true, perfect vacuum leaves the brain desperately searching for any auditory input. When it finds nothing, the brain doesn't simply rest or shut down. Instead, it aggressively turns inward. Without external sound waves to process, the human mind begins a process of internal noise amplification. The lack of external stimuli causes the brain to violently amplify internal thoughts, along with the physical mechanics of your own body. The beating of your heart becomes a deafening, rhythmic thud. The rush of blood flowing through your veins sounds like a raging river inside your head. The subtle grinding of your own bones and joints becomes agonizingly loud. But it goes far deeper than just physical body noises. The brain, panicked by the unnatural lack of environmental confirmation, begins to create existential loops. Studies of people placed in extremely dark, silent environments on Earth, like deep isolation chambers, reveal that extended periods without sensory input cause the brain to rebel against the void. The visual and auditory cortexes, starved for information, begin to invent their own. People experience severe disorientation, immediate anxiety spikes, and intense, vivid hallucinations. They hear phantom sounds and see geometric patterns that aren't there. Now imagine scaling that terrestrial panic up to the reality of deep space. The true horror of cosmic silence is that it forces you to be trapped completely alone with your own biology and your own unravelling mind, entirely cut off from the physical reality of the unimaginably violent universe surrounding you. We are, at our core, primitive biological creatures strictly bound by the limitations of our evolution. Our eyes can only see a microscopic sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, and our ears can only detect physical vibrations travelling through a dense atmospheric medium. We look out into the night sky, fully aware that there are somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy alone. We know there are roughly 200 billion trillion stars scattered across 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. We perceive a universe that is majestic, ancient and still, but that stillness is nothing more than a biological illusion. Space is not just quiet. It refuses to interact with our senses on our terms. It allows entire galaxies to collide, massive stars to explode into supernovas, and supermassive black holes to devour solar systems, all while blatantly denying us the acoustic confirmation that these apocalyptic events are actually happening. The universe is putting on the most violent explosive display in existence, and we are fundamentally deaf to it. And this brings us to an incredibly unsettling realization about our place in this silent void. For a century, humanity has been loudly broadcasting radio waves, sending golden records on the Voyager probes, and screaming our coordinates into an ocean of endless nothingness, desperately trying to make our presence known. We naturally assume that the silence of the cosmos simply means that the universe is empty, or that the distances are just too great for us to hear anyone else calling back. But what if the silence is not a passive characteristic of the vacuum? What if the universe's inability to carry sound is not just a quirky rule of physics, but a terrifying feature of a reality we do not yet understand? Space is an acoustic void, yes, but it is also a massive graveyard of violent, cataclysmic events that unfold without a single whisper. If the universe executes its most destructive forces in absolute, dead silence, we are forced to confront a deeply disturbing mystery. The silence we hear might not just be the absence of air. It might be evidence of a profound biological limitation, an evolutionary trap, or evidence of something out there in the dark actively choosing to hide. You have likely been scrolling through the internet late at night and stumbled across them. The viral audio clips released by space agencies, proudly shared across social media with titles like "What a Black Hole Actually Sounds Like" or "The Haunting Song of the Planets." Millions of people click on these videos, put in their earphones, and listen in awe to the majestic, eerie symphony of the cosmos. You might have heard the rhythmic pulsing hum of the early universe, the chaotic roaring of a solar storm, or the deep guttural moan of a distant galaxy. When we hear these clips, a profound sense of comfort washes over us. Hearing these sounds makes the universe feel alive, connected, and significantly less isolating. It gives us a sensory anchor in an otherwise incomprehensible void. Our brains desperately crave auditory feedback to validate reality. And when NASA provides us with the crashing waves of interstellar space or the whistling winds of Neptune, we feel a false sense of familiarity. We trick ourselves into believing that if we were simply floating out there in the dark, the universe would sing to us. But it is time to strip away that comfort. Those viral audio clips are a carefully constructed technological illusion, and understanding the truth behind them reveals a reality far more terrifying than any eerie space song. The universe is not singing to us. These are not actual acoustic sounds. In fact, space is a near-perfect vacuum, completely devoid of the physical medium required for acoustic sound waves to travel from a source to our human ears. What you are actually hearing in those viral videos is the result of a process called sonification. Space agencies take raw, invisible data, things like radio waves, microwaves, X-rays, and electromagnetic radiation, and they artificially translate that data into an audible format so our primitive human brains can process it. We are literally forcing our computers to invent noises for an environment that is fundamentally hostile to our perception. We are so terrified of the absolute dead silence of the cosmos that we program our machines to lie to us, transforming invisible, lethal radiation into a comforting, acoustic soundscape. To truly understand the scale of this sensory deception, look at one of the most famous viral space audios ever released, the sound of a supermassive black hole. Deep within the Perseus galaxy cluster, located an incomprehensible 250 million light-years away, lurks a gravitational monster so powerful that not even light can escape its grasp. When astronomers aimed NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory at this region, they discovered that the black hole was sending out ripples through the hot surrounding gas. It is true that these ripples are a form of pressure wave, a mechanical vibration moving through the sparse plasma. But to call this a sound that humans can experience is a massive misrepresentation. The original frequency of the ripples rolling off that supermassive black hole was so impossibly low that it exists entirely outside the realm of human comprehension. In order to make it audible for the viral audio release, scientists had to mathematically scale the pitch up by an astonishing 288 quadrillion times. Let that number sink in. 288 quadrillion times. If you were to somehow transport yourself to the Perseus galaxy cluster and hover right beside that black hole as it devoured surrounding matter, your ears would not hear a deep cinematic rumble. You would be met with an oppressive absolute acoustic void. The universe is putting on a display of unimaginable power, but it stubbornly refuses to adapt to the biological limitations of your ears. We see this same technological safety net applied to the stars themselves. If you have listened to the audio captured by NASA's Parker Solar Probe, the spacecraft that flew closer to the Sun than any before it, you likely heard what sounded like a chaotic screaming hurricane. It sounds like violent rushing winds and sharp whistling noises, but there is no wind in space. What the probe actually captured were Whistler mode waves, which are pressure waves generated by electrically charged particles and energetic electrons bursting out of the Sun's corona. It is radiation and raw plasma interacting with magnetic fields. Only when scientists run this electromagnetic data through a sonification program does it suddenly transform into the comforting, recognizable sound of a rushing terrestrial storm. The illusion goes even deeper when we venture to the outer edges of our own solar system. When the Voyager 2 spacecraft performed its historic flyby of Neptune, it captured data that was later sonified into an otherworldly, lonely groan. People listen to this and imagine the icy atmosphere of the gas giant howling in the dark. But again, Voyager 2 was not recording acoustic audio. It was recording the complex invisible interactions between the charged particles of the Sun's solar wind and Neptune's constantly shifting magnetic field. Even the legendary Voyager 1 spacecraft, which famously pierced the boundary of our solar system and entered interstellar space, participated in this grand auditory illusion. The spacecraft sent back data from the vast dark regions between the stars, which was sonified to sound exactly like the gentle crashing of ocean waves. It is deeply poetic, almost romantic, to imagine the interstellar medium sounding like a calm sea. But the reality is that Voyager 1 was simply detecting the electromagnetic waves oscillating in the sparse plasma, along with the invisible strikes of charged particles hitting its instruments. The universe does not have oceans of water crashing in the void. It has lethal cosmic rays and turbulent radiation that we have artificially dressed up as a familiar, soothing Earth sound. When you strip away this technological translation, the romanticism vanishes and the psychological horror sets in. We are taking the lethal, chaotic, and invisible forces of the universe and wrapping them in an acoustic blanket, so we do not have to confront the terrifying reality of where we actually live. We are trapped in an acoustic void. The cosmos is teeming with catastrophic events, from supernovas tearing through galaxies to black holes shredding solar systems, and it is all happening in perfect, dead, physical silence. There is no roaring fire, no booming collisions, no whistling winds. The viral NASA space sounds are not a window into the reality of the universe. They are a mirror reflecting our own desperate biological need to make sense of the dark. We need the universe to make noise because the alternative is to accept that we are entirely isolated, floating in an environment that does not care about our existence and refuses to interact with us on our own terms. Once you understand that every single space sound you have ever heard online is a mathematical translation of invisible radiation, the silence of space becomes infinitely more oppressive. You realize that the universe is not a grand symphonic orchestra playing a beautiful cosmic song. It is a deafeningly silent theatre of extreme violence. And if the physical mechanics of the universe dictate that nothing can be heard, we are forced to ask an even darker question. If the void naturally mutes the death of stars and the birth of black holes, what else is out there, lurking in the absolute quiet, remaining completely undetectable to our primitive human ears? For millions of years, human biology has been violently forged in an environment of constant, unbroken sensory saturation. Down here on the surface of Earth, you have never once experienced true silence, even in what you perceive as the absolute quietest room in your house. In the dead of night, your environment is practically screaming with invisible information. Your ears are constantly picking up the low, rhythmic hum of electrical appliances, the subtle shifting of your home's foundation, the wind brushing against the glass, and the distant, muffled echoes of human civilization. Our brains evolved to desperately rely on this constant ambient noise as our oldest and most reliable alarm system. Throughout human evolution, darkness was the time when predators hunted, and when visual input was taken away, our ancestors survived purely by listening to the subtle vibrations of the atmosphere. We use sound to navigate our surroundings, to subconsciously gauge the size of the open spaces around us, and to detect unseen threats hiding in the dark. The auditory processing centres in your brain are always turned on, hungrily absorbing the mechanical waves of the air to constantly anchor you to physical reality. Sound is not just a background feature of human life. It is a fundamental biological requirement for our sanity. But what happens to that primitive biological machine when you completely rip it out of its comforting atmospheric blanket and plunge it into the absolute dead vacuum of deep space? When you strip away every single vibrating molecule and place a human being into an environment where acoustic sound fundamentally cannot exist, the result is not peaceful. The result is a terrifying, rapid psychological breakdown known in fringe scientific discussions as sensory void collapse. To truly understand the visceral horror of sensory void collapse, we must look at what happens when researchers artificially simulate extreme sensory deprivation right here on Earth. Scientists have conducted extensive studies on individuals placed in deep isolation chambers, or specially designed flotation tanks, which are environments heavily engineered to block out all external light and, crucially, all external sound. Subjects are suspended in body temperature salt water, creating an uncanny illusion of weightlessness that strips away the feeling of gravity and mimics the hostile microgravity of the cosmos. At first, subjects often report feeling deeply relaxed. The sudden, unnatural absence of sensory bombardment feels like a profound relief to an overworked nervous system. But this relief is incredibly fleeting, and the descent into madness happens much faster than most people realise. Within just hours, the human brain begins to realise that it is being entirely starved of the fundamental inputs it needs to confirm its own existence. And when the human brain receives no signals from the outside world, it does not simply power down and wait. It aggressively, violently rebels. Because our auditory cortex evolved over millions of years to constantly process atmospheric vibrations, plunging it into a perfect vacuum leaves it desperately searching the empty dark for any auditory input. When it finds absolutely nothing in the environment, the brain turns its attention entirely inward, triggering a deeply unsettling biological phenomenon known as internal noise amplification. In the total absence of the world outside, the physical mechanics of your own biology become overwhelmingly, agonizingly loud. You begin to hear the rhythmic, deafening thud of your own heart beating in your chest, pounding like a heavy drum against your ribs. The complex rush of blood flowing through the veins in your neck and pumping into your head sounds like a roaring, violent river. The subtle, everyday grinding of your own bones, joints and cartilage. Noises that are usually easily drowned out by the ambient sounds of Earth suddenly become front and centre, dominating your auditory perception. But the horror of internal noise amplification goes much deeper than just listening to the wet, mechanical functioning of your organs. The brain, panicked by the unnatural and absolute lack of environmental confirmation, begins to invent its own reality. Brain scans of individuals kept in prolonged total darkness and silence show that the visual and auditory cortexes do not become inactive. Instead, they begin to hijack other neural pathways in a process called cross-modal plasticity. The brain literally reorganizes itself in a matter of days, desperately recruiting other processing regions to artificially generate the sensory input it is missing. Subjects in total sensory deprivation experience severe disorientation and immediate, sharp spikes in anxiety. They lose all track of time, unable to tell if mere seconds or agonizing hours have passed. Without the subtle auditory cues that tell us about room size and physical barriers, the concept of spatial awareness completely collapses. The mind creates terrifying existential loops, amplifying internal thoughts and anxieties until they echo like booming voices in a vast empty canyon. This desperate attempt by the brain to fill the sensory void inevitably leads to intense, vivid hallucinations. People begin to hear phantom sounds, whispers in the dark, heavy footsteps approaching, or unexplainable ambient noises that simply do not exist. They project complex geometric patterns, shifting colours, and entirely fabricated visual scenes into the empty blackness. The brain would rather literally invent a false, terrifying reality than accept the incomprehensible, absolute nothingness of the void. Now, take that terrestrial panic, the complete unravelling of a human mind in a water tank on Earth, and scale it up to the cold, unforgiving reality of deep space. Imagine being an astronaut stepping out of the airlock, floating untethered thousands of miles away from the safety of your home planet, suspended alone in the cosmic dark. The silence you experience out there is not the temporary, artificial quiet of an isolation chamber. It is the infinite, eternal silence of the universe itself. The psychological impact of being completely cut off from all sensory input, while surrounded by the unimaginably vast expanse of the cosmos, is profoundly destabilizing. You are confronted with the terrifying reality that the silence is not just an absence of noise. It is a heavy, oppressive force that actively isolates you from the physical reality of the universe. When you look out into the void, you know intellectually that you are safe inside your suit, but your primitive instincts, developed over millions of years to associate total silence with extreme vulnerability and unseen predators, trigger an uncontrollable primal fear response. The silence feels threatening. It feels predatory. The true danger of the cosmic void isn't just that the universe is quiet. The danger is that the silence forcefully strips away your primary evolutionary tools for understanding reality. leaving you entirely alone with a mind that is actively collapsing under the weight of the emptiness. You are forced to confront the absolute insignificance of your existence, floating in an environment that is so fundamentally hostile to your biology that it forces your brain to invent a false reality just to survive the terror of the true nothingness. In the absolute silence of space, there is no wind to feel, no temperature variations to warn you of nearby objects, and no sound waves to confirm that the universe around you is actually real. You are left with only your internal sense of your body's position, completely physically disconnected from the majesty and the violence of the cosmos. The vacuum traps you inside the fleshy prison of your own body, forcing you to listen to your own biological decay on an inescapable loop. It is a unique brand of psychological torture engineered by the very laws of physics, a stark reminder that humans were never meant to leave the noisy, vibrating cradle of Earth. Up until now, we have discussed the acoustic physics of the vacuum and the biological breaking point of the human mind in theoretical terms, but we do not have to rely strictly on simulation tanks or mathematical theory to understand this terror. Human beings have actually crossed this boundary. We have sent our own kind into the freezing, breathless abyss, and their lived experiences reveal a psychological horror that goes far beyond simple claustrophobia or the fear of heights. When astronauts step out of the artificial, pressurized safety of their spacecraft for an untethered spacewalk, they are violently confronted with the reality of where they actually are. They are encased in a fragile, thin layer of synthetic material, suspended thousands of miles above their home planet, floating in an environment that actively wants to kill them. But the most shocking aspect of this experience is not the lack of gravity or the threat of lethal radiation. It is the absolute crushing sensory deprivation that the vacuum enforces upon them. Consider the historic 1984 spacewalk of Bruce McCandless, the first astronaut to float completely untethered in the void. When he looked away from the illuminated surface of Earth and the glaring light of the sun, gazing instead out into the deep void between the distant stars, he experienced a darkness and a silence that defied human comprehension. He described this void not as an empty space, but as something that felt almost physical, an absolute nothingness that aggressively penetrated everything around him. In this environment, you lose all normal sensory cues. There is no air current to feel, no atmospheric temperature variation to warn you of nearby objects, and absolutely no sound waves to bounce off your surroundings and give you a subconscious sense of spatial awareness. You are left with only your internal sense of your body's position. The only sounds you hear are the mechanical whirring of your suit's life support systems, the aggressive rush of your own breathing, and the frantic pounding of your heartbeat echoing inside your helmet. Outside of that tiny, fragile bubble of artificial atmosphere, the universe is dead silent. This environment triggers a profound unease, an uncontrollable, primal fear response that is incredibly difficult for even the most highly trained astronauts to rationalize away. For millions of years, human evolution has hardwired our brains to associate complete, absolute darkness and total silence with extreme vulnerability. In our ancient terrestrial history, silence in the dark meant that a predator was stalking us, or that we were dangerously isolated from the safety of our tribe. When an astronaut is suspended in the infinite quiet of the cosmos, those ancient survival instincts scream that they are in immediate lethal danger. The silence of space feels predatory because our biology cannot accept that an environment can be this vast, this dark, and completely empty. To truly understand how this acoustic and visual isolation breaks down the human mind, we must look back to December of 1968, during the historic Apollo 8 mission. Astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders became the first human beings to ever leave Earth's orbit and travel to another celestial body. But the most harrowing part of their journey occurred when their spacecraft passed behind the far side of the moon. In that moment, an immense wall of solid lunar rock severed their line of sight to Earth and entirely blocked all radio communication with mission control. For 45 agonizing minutes, they were completely alone. They were farther away from any other living human being than anyone had ever been in the history of our species. Looking out the window away from the moon's surface, Jim Lovell saw an absolute perfect darkness. There were stars, but in the pure vacuum, they provided no sense of scale or proximity. They were just cold, distant points of light suspended in a void that felt infinite, a silence so deep and unbroken that you could fall into it forever and never reach a destination. The silence they experienced was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating realization that the universe is utterly indifferent to human existence. This profound indifference was felt again during the terrifying Apollo 13 mission in 1970. After an oxygen tank explosion crippled their spacecraft, the crew was forced to power down almost all their systems to conserve energy, turning their vessel into a freezing, dark lifeboat drifting through the void, surrounded by the infinite silence of space. Commander Jim Lovell noted how the darkness outside felt entirely uncaring. The silence didn't care if they suffocated, froze, or made it back home. It would remain unchanged, eternal, and perfectly quiet either way. That pure cosmic indifference is somehow infinitely more terrifying than an active, malicious enemy, because an enemy can be fought or bargained with. The silence of space simply watches you die and offers nothing in return, but it is the moment of return from this absolute isolation that triggers the most profound psychological trauma of all. As the Apollo 8 astronauts emerged from the dark, silent shadow of the moon, William Anders raised his Hasselblad camera and captured what is arguably the most influential and petrifying photograph ever taken, Earthrise. He saw our planet rising over the barren, grey lunar landscape, a tiny fragile sphere of blue and white suspended entirely alone in the eternal blackness of the cosmos. We often describe this image as beautiful or triumphant, but for those who truly understand the context of the void, it is a source of pure existential dread. When you look at that tiny ball, you are looking at all of us. Every single human memory you have ever had, every person who has ever lived, every war, every triumph, every mundane moment of human history is contained on that microscopically small speck of dust. This visual collision of the fragile Earth against the infinite silent void triggers a documented psychological phenomenon known as the overview effect. Often romanticized in media as a peaceful, unifying awakening, the overview effect is actually a violent, destabilizing shock to the human ego. It induces an overwhelming awareness of human fragility and a sudden, involuntary philosophical reckoning. As Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell profoundly noted, when you look at Earth from the silence of the moon, international politics and human conflicts suddenly look unimaginably petty, but the overview effect cannot be separated from the acoustic reality of space. The psychological weight of seeing Earth as a fragile marble is exponentially amplified by the deafening silence surrounding it. Down on Earth, we are constantly distracted by the noise of our own perceived importance. We are surrounded by the loud, chaotic hum of our cities, our media, and our daily struggles, which creates an illusion that human life is the centre of the universe. Space forcefully strips away that auditory illusion. When you are floating in the vacuum, the universe refuses to speak to you. It refuses to validate your existence. The absolute silence acts as a terrifying psychological mirror. When an astronaut looks out into the silent void, they are no longer just looking at stars. They are forced to look directly into themselves, confronting their deepest fears, their ultimate mortality, and the terrifying reality of their cosmic insignificance. The silence proves that we are entirely local, temporary, and small. It alters human consciousness not by adding new information, but by brutally removing all the terrestrial noise we use to comfort ourselves. Some astronauts find this realization liberating, concluding that if humanity is cosmically insignificant, then our daily anxieties are equally trivial. But for many others, it is a crushing, suffocating dread. It is the stark realization that everything we have ever built, everything we love, and everything we fear is happening on a barely visible speck in an uncaring void. The existential dread of the astronaut is the ultimate proof that the silence of space is not passive. It is an active, destabilizing force that attacks the human mind. We evolved to be loud, to communicate, to conquer our environments and fill them with our noise. But the cosmos does not care about our noise. It swallows our radio signals, it mutes our most violent explosions, and it traps our astronauts in an acoustic isolation so profound that it rewires their understanding of reality. And if this perfect, terrifying silence is capable of breaking the human ego just a few thousand miles away from our home planet, we must ask ourselves what that same silence means for the billions of light years of seemingly empty space stretching out beyond us. Up until this point, we have operated under a deeply human assumption. We have assumed that because our astronauts step into the void and hear absolutely nothing, and because our most advanced microphones pick up no acoustic waves, the universe itself is fundamentally physically quiet. We treat the silence of space as an objective fact of reality, an unbreakable rule dictated by the physical vacuum. But there is a fatal flaw in this logic, and it is born entirely of our own evolutionary arrogance. We measure the vast, incomprehensible cosmos using only the primitive tools we developed to survive on one tiny rock. What if the silence of space is not a physical characteristic of the universe at all? This brings us to a terrifying fringe concept known in deep law discussions as the perception limitation theory. The premise is deeply unsettling. What if the cosmos isn't quiet? What if the universe is actually deafeningly loud, teeming with information, signals, and chaotic cosmic chatter, but our biological hardware is simply too primitive to tune into the right frequency? To understand the true psychological horror of this theory, we first have to admit how pathetic and narrow human perception actually is. You navigate your daily life believing you are experiencing reality exactly as it exists. You trust your eyes and your ears to give you an accurate map of your surroundings. But the truth is, your brain is only receiving a microscopic, highly filtered fraction of the universe. Consider your vision. The light you can physically see, all the vibrant colours of the rainbow, spanning from deep red to bright violet, makes up less than 2% of the actual electromagnetic spectrum. It is less than one single octave on a grand cosmic spectrum that spans more than 60 octaves. All around you, right at this very second, the universe is absolutely blazing with infrared radiation, microwaves, gamma rays, and X-rays. If you possess the biological ability to see in microwaves, the night sky wouldn't look dark or empty at all. It would be glowing uniformly in every single direction with the blinding ancient afterglow of the Big Bang. But because of the severe limitations of your primate biology, you look up and simply see an empty black void. This limitation extends far beyond just light. Roughly 95% of the entire universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy, forces that completely dominate the structure of galaxies and the expansion of space. Yet they do not interact with light or normal matter in any way that we can directly perceive. We are fundamentally blind to 95% of the universe's total contents, interacting with only a tiny glowing sliver of reality. Now, apply that exact same severe biological limitation to your sense of hearing. Our ears are incredibly specific, terrestrial instruments. They were forged by millions of years of evolution for one singular planetary purpose: to detect physical vibrations travelling through a dense atmosphere. Our auditory processing centres are perfectly tuned to hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of a branch, or the vocalizations of a nearby predator. They are completely and utterly useless in a vacuum, because sound requires particles to travel. The perception limitation theory suggests that we have mistakenly projected our biological deafness onto the rest of the cosmos. For the last 60 years, humanity has been pointing massive radio telescopes at the stars, scanning the void, and declaring the universe to be completely empty, simply because we do not hear anyone talking to us. We assume the silence is proof of our isolation. But consider the timeline of human technology. Anatomically modern humans have existed for about 300,000 years. Yet, before the 1860s, humanity had absolutely no idea that radio waves even existed. For tens of thousands of years of human history, radio waves were passing straight through our bodies, passing through our growing cities, and passing through the Earth itself. And we were completely oblivious to them because we lacked the biological and technological receivers to notice. It has only been a little over a century since we learned how to harness these waves, and we have proudly leaked our television broadcasts and radar installations out into the dark, creating a tiny 100 light-year bubble of human noise in a galaxy that is 100,000 light-years across. We listen for narrow-band radio frequencies and naturally assume that any intelligent species out there will use the exact same primitive tools to communicate. But why would a civilization that is millions or billions of years older than us use something as slow and inefficient as radio waves? Assuming that highly advanced extraterrestrials communicate using radio frequencies is like expecting a modern tech company to send you an urgent message via smoke signals. Advanced civilizations might use communication methods we cannot even begin to comprehend. They might use laser pulses, focused neutrino beams, or manipulate quantum entanglement to instantly transmit complex information across the galaxy without any delay. If they have transcended biology and operate as post-biological digital consciousnesses, they might process information on a quantum level that has absolutely no classical analogue. If we somehow intercepted their communication, we wouldn't even recognise it as language. To our primitive instruments and biologically limited brains, their highly structured data streams would just look like random background noise, unexplainable cosmic anomalies, or meaningless quantum fluctuations. We could be staring directly at the greatest, most sophisticated interstellar network in existence, entirely unable to decode it. This is the crushing realization at the heart of the perception limitation theory. We might not be sitting in an empty, silent room. We might be standing in the middle of a screaming, chaotic, overcrowded stadium, completely surrounded by 1 trillion advanced beings. The space between the stars might be heavily saturated with interstellar traffic, massive data streams, and galactic broadcasts all overlapping in a deafening symphony of intelligent life. The universe might be unimaginably loud, but because we are trapped inside fragile flesh vehicles that only respond to vibrating air molecules and a tiny fraction of the visible light spectrum, we sit right in the middle of this roaring cosmos and conclude that we are completely alone. It is a terrifying shift in perspective that violently strips away our sense of understanding. It means the great silence of the universe is not a physical truth, it is a biological prison. We are not the lone, heroic survivors wandering through an empty, silent graveyard. We are just deaf, primitive creatures stumbling through a crowded room, completely oblivious to the unimaginable noise and activity happening right in front of our faces. And this raises an even more disturbing thought that we cannot easily shake. If we are completely incapable of perceiving the reality of the universe as it actually is, what else is out there, moving silently through the dark that we cannot see, hear, or feel? If our inability to hear the cosmos is not a biological accident, what if it is something much darker? What if the absolute silence of space is not a physical law of nature, but a calculated computational shortcut? We navigate our entire lives operating under the assumption that reality is an objective, physical place. We believe that the universe is made of tangible matter, forged in the fires of the Big Bang, and governed by unbreakable laws of physics. But to understand the true existential horror of the cosmic void, we must entertain a concept that has steadily moved from the fringes of internet law into serious scientific and philosophical debate. In 2003, the philosopher Nick Bostrom popularised a deeply unsettling argument that has since gained enormous traction among serious thinkers, physicists, and technologists. It goes like this. Assume that any sufficiently advanced technological civilization will eventually reach a point in their development where they possess the computing power to create highly detailed, perfectly realistic simulations of conscious beings. These simulated beings would have thoughts, memories, emotions, and sensory experiences that feel absolutely real to them. If creating such simulations is possible, an advanced civilization would not just create one. They would likely create billions, if not trillions, of simulated universes, each housing billions of conscious minds. Therefore, the number of simulated minds in existence would massively outnumber the biological minds living in the original base reality. Statistically speaking, the mathematical odds are overwhelming that you are not a physical human being sitting on a physical rock, but a complex string of code running inside a vast, simulated universe. If we apply this terrifying logic to the cosmos, one of our greatest scientific mysteries is instantly and elegantly solved. For decades, the Fermi paradox has haunted astronomers, asking why, in an observable universe spanning 94 billion light-years and containing trillions of galaxies, we hear absolutely nothing. We search the dark for radio signals, megastructures, and signs of interstellar engineering, but the universe responds with a deafening, unbroken quiet. But if we are living inside a simulation, the great silence of the cosmos is no longer a paradox. There are no alien radio signals and no sprawling galactic empires because the simulation designers simply did not program them into our reality. The universe appears entirely empty because it is essentially a highly detailed stage set focused entirely on Earth, with the rest of the cosmos acting as a silent, unpopulated backdrop. This brings us to a specific, deeply unsettling theory buried within high-retention fringe law, the simulation muting hypothesis. To grasp the sheer horror of this concept, think about how human software engineers design vast, open-world video games. To save computational power and memory, a computer does not fully render the entire digital world at all times. It employs rendering shortcuts. It only generates the environment immediately surrounding the player in high definition. The distant mountains you see on the horizon are just flat, low-resolution images, and the physics engines are completely turned off for objects outside of your direct field of view. The simulation muting hypothesis suggests that the creators of our universe face the exact same logistical problem. Rendering an entire universe is an unimaginably resource-heavy task, and the acoustics of that universe would be the most taxing element of all. Sound is a mechanical wave. It requires a physical medium, trillions upon trillions of vibrating, colliding particles to travel from its source to an observer. Now imagine trying to render a dense physical atmosphere across the entire unfathomable expanse of the cosmos. Imagine the sheer computational processing power required to calculate the acoustic physics and microscopic particle collisions of every single supernova, every colliding galaxy, and the chaotic plasma storms raging on every single star, all at the exact same time. The processing power required to render the acoustic feedback of a completely loud, physically reactive universe would instantly overload and crash the system. So how does an unimaginably advanced civilization build a stable, functional universe without crashing their servers? They cut corners. They strip the universe of its acoustic medium. By making the incomprehensible vastness of deep space a near-perfect vacuum, an environment where the density of matter drops to just one single atom per cubic centimetre, or even one atom per cubic metre in intergalactic space, the creators effectively muted the universe. The physical rule that sound cannot travel through a vacuum is not a majestic, unyielding law of nature. According to this hypothesis, it is nothing more than a desperate rendering shortcut. The creators deleted the particles needed to carry sound, saving infinite processing power by simply choosing not to render sound layers in regions devoid of atmospheric mediums. We can actually see other glaring examples of these rendering shortcuts hiding in plain sight. Consider dark matter and dark energy. We know that roughly 95% of the universe's total mass and energy is made up of these mysterious forces. They completely dominate the structure of galaxies and drive the acceleration of space, yet they do not interact with light, and we cannot directly see or feel them. In the context of a simulated reality, dark matter is the ultimate low-resolution asset. It is unrendered, collisionless mass. The creators needed enough gravity to keep the galaxies from flying apart, but rendering physical interacting matter for 95% of the universe would take too much active memory. So they inserted invisible, unrendered weight into the code to keep the physics engine running smoothly, completely hiding it from our primitive senses. When you look at reality through this lens, the silence of space becomes deeply claustrophobic. The Earth, with its dense atmosphere, its crashing oceans, its shifting tectonic plates, and its deafening hum of biological life, is the highly rendered, active, playable area of the simulation. It is the only localized zone where the physics engine is running at maximum capacity, granting us the comforting illusion of a tactile, vibrating, acoustic reality. But the moment you step off this tiny blue marble and enter the void, you hit the edge of the fully rendered map. The universe actively executes its most destructive forces in perfect, dead silence, because the system simply cannot afford the memory to let you hear them. When an astronaut steps out of an airlock, gazing away from the illuminated surface of Earth and out into the pure void, they are violently confronted with this artificial boundary. The absolute darkness and the crushing, profound quiet they report experiencing is not the awe-inspiring majesty of nature. They are pressing their faces against the cold, dead glass of a digital terrarium. They are experiencing the terrifying limits of the software we are permanently trapped inside. The silence isn't an environment, it is a lack of data. And if the silence of space is truly just an artifact of an artificial reality, It leaves us with an inescapable, paralyzing dread. We are not just alone in a vast physical universe. We are entirely at the mercy of whatever sits outside the simulation. If our entire reality is a construct designed to save processing power, by keeping the cosmos dark, empty, and acoustically dead, then we must ask ourselves what happens when the simulation inevitably ends. What happens when the creators decide that this silent, lonely experiment has run its course, and they simply reach out and pull the plug? The heavy, oppressive silence we fear in the night sky might not just be the absence of sound. It might be the quiet, steady hum of a machine, endlessly rendering a reality that was never meant to be real in the first place. We have explored the physical acoustics of the vacuum, the limits of human biology, and the fringe possibility that our reality is a muted simulation. But even if we set aside those deeply unsettling theories, we are still forced to confront a much more tangible, observable horror. When we shift our focus from the physical silence of the vacuum to the technological silence of the stars, we slam directly into the most haunting mystery in all of science. We are forced to look at the numbers, and the mathematical reality of our cosmos dictates that the universe should be deafeningly loud with the chatter of intelligent life. To truly grasp the psychological weight of this mystery, you have to understand the staggering scale of the playing field. When you look up at the night sky, your primitive human eyes can only perceive a few thousand stars. But our Milky Way galaxy alone contains somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars, each one a potential sun that could be harbouring an entire solar system. And the Milky Way is just one single galaxy among an estimated 2 trillion galaxies swirling in the observable universe. When you calculate the sum of this cosmic expanse, you get a number so massive it entirely breaks human comprehension. There are roughly 200 billion trillion stars in the observable universe. For decades, we falsely believed that planets might be a rare cosmic anomaly, but our most advanced space telescopes have revolutionized our understanding, proving that the vast majority of stars possess at least one planet, and rocky planets, very similar to Earth, appear to be incredibly common. Conservative estimates suggest that there could be tens of billions of potentially habitable planets existing in the precise zone where liquid water could form, just within our Milky Way galaxy alone. Furthermore, the universe has existed for roughly 13.8 billion years, while our own solar system is a relatively young 4.6 billion years old. This means there were billions of years before our sun even burst into existence, where other stars and planets were forming, cooling, and potentially giving rise to life. If even a microscopic fraction of those billions of habitable worlds developed intelligent life, and a fraction of those developed space travel, they would have had an enormous, almost incomprehensible amount of time to spread their influence across the galaxy. Even travelling at a mere fraction of the speed of light, an advanced civilization could colonize the entire Milky Way in just a few tens of millions of years. In 1950, while discussing these overwhelming mathematical probabilities, the physicist Enrico Fermi looked at the sheer volume of stars, the age of the universe, and the extreme likelihood of extraterrestrial life, and he asked a simple, chilling question: where is everybody? This is the Fermi paradox, and the answer to that question is the single most terrifying aspect of the cosmos. For more than 60 years, humanity has been desperately listening for an answer. Through the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, we have pointed massive radio telescopes at the heavens, scanning different star systems and meticulously listening across a wide range of frequencies for any signal that might indicate an intelligent origin. We listened specifically for artificial signals that would stand out against the natural radiation of the cosmos, narrowband transmissions, complex modulation patterns, or signals that repeat at highly structured, regular intervals. We assumed that any civilization, even slightly more advanced than our own, would be leaking their communications, their radar, and their television broadcasts out into the dark, just as we have been loudly doing for the past century. Yet, when we aim our most sensitive instruments at the billions of stars surrounding us, the universe responds with an absolute heavy quiet. We hear absolutely nothing. There are no radio transmissions. There are no narrow-band signals cutting through the static. There is no interstellar chatter echoing between the spiral arms of our galaxy. We have searched for the physical evidence of advanced life, hoping to find the colossal techno-signatures of Type 2 or Type 3 civilizations on the Kardashev scale. If an ancient civilization had advanced enough to harness the total energy output of their star, they would likely build a Dyson swarm, a massive collection of solar collectors orbiting the star that would produce a massive, highly visible infrared signature. Astronomers have surveyed hundreds of thousands of galaxies specifically looking for these glowing empires, and they have found zero evidence of their existence. There are no megastructures, no artificially moved stars, and zero signs of engineering on a cosmic scale. There have been fleeting, agonizing moments of false hope. In the late summer of 1977, an astronomer reviewing data from the Big Ear radio telescope discovered a staggering anomaly. For exactly 72 seconds, the telescope detected a powerful, highly unusual, narrowband radio signal blasting out from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It was so pristine and matched the exact characteristics of an artificial alien broadcast so perfectly that the astronomer simply wrote "wow" in red pen on the data printout. But despite decades of meticulously searching the exact same region of the sky with even more powerful telescopes, the wow signal never returned. It never repeated, and without repetition, it remains a ghostly, unexplained anomaly fading into the static. This brings us to a devastating pivot in our understanding of reality. Stripping away all of our technological expectations reveals an oppressive truth. The great silence of the universe is not just the physical absence of an acoustic medium. It is the complete, terrifying absence of life. The universe is not just an acoustic void. It is a technological graveyard. Despite billions of years of cosmic evolution and billions of perfectly habitable worlds, the universe is technologically mute, and we are forced to confront the horrifying reasons why. One of the most prominent scientific explanations for the Great Silence is the rare earth hypothesis. We look at the cosmos and assume life is abundant, but we fundamentally misunderstand how many incredibly lucky cosmic accidents were required to create human beings. For complex life to survive on Earth, it required an impossibly delicate balance. We needed a star that was perfectly stable, not too hot to boil our oceans and not too violent to sterilize our surface with radiation. We needed to be located in the exact sliver of the galactic habitable zone, far away from the lethal supernova explosions and violent radiation of the galactic center. We needed a massive neighboring planet like Jupiter to act as a gravitational vacuum cleaner, pulling in comets and rogue asteroids that would otherwise constantly bombard our fragile world. We needed a molten iron core to generate a magnetic shield to deflect the lethal solar wind, and plate tectonics to perfectly regulate our atmospheric carbon over geological timescales. If just one of these millions of variables had been slightly altered, Earth would be a barren, toxic wasteland, exactly like Venus, or a freezing, dead desert exactly like Mars, The rare Earth hypothesis posits that while simple single-celled microbes might exist everywhere, the evolution of complex intelligent life requires a lottery win of such astronomical proportions that it practically never happens. The universe is completely silent because there is simply no one else out there capable of speaking. We might be an accidental miracle, an absolute anomaly floating in an endless ocean of dead, irradiated rock. But there is a second explanation for the great silence, and it is infinitely more terrifying than the prospect of being alone. It is known as the Great Filter Hypothesis. This theory suggests that life might actually be incredibly common, and intelligence might routinely spark across the galaxy. However, somewhere along the evolutionary timeline between non-living chemistry and becoming a spacefaring galactic empire, there is a developmental step that is so impossibly difficult, so overwhelmingly lethal, that it acts as a cosmic filter. This filter brutally and efficiently eliminates almost every single civilization that tries to pass through it. The most chilling question humanity must ask itself is, where exactly is this filter? If the great filter is in our deep evolutionary past, it means the jump from single-celled organisms to complex life is the near impossible hurdle, and we have already survived the hardest part of our existence. We are the incredibly rare exception, and our future amongst the stars is bright and limitless. But if the great filter is in our future, the silence of the night sky transforms from a peaceful emptiness into a deafening, apocalyptic warning. If the filter lies ahead of us, it means that the universe is currently littered with the silent, irradiated ruins of billions of dead civilizations, all of whom reached our exact level of technological advancement, and then inevitably destroyed themselves. Every intelligent species might eventually unlock the secrets of the atom, the code of genetics, or the architecture of artificial intelligence. But intelligence does not guarantee wisdom. When a species gains the technological power of gods, but retains the primitive, violent instincts of their evolutionary past, they inevitably turn that technology inward. The silence we hear when we point our telescopes at the stars might simply be the sound of every other civilization violently wiping themselves out through global nuclear war, bioengineered pandemics, or runaway environmental collapse. In this scenario, the Fermi paradox is entirely solved by our own self-destructive nature. The silence is evidence that technological civilizations frequently arise, proudly beam their television and radio signals out into the dark for a brief, glorious century, and then violently snuff themselves out long before they ever manage to colonize another star. If the great filter awaits us, then the absolute quiet of the cosmos is a terrifying mirror reflecting our own rapidly approaching extinction. We are left floating in a vast, dark expanse, shouting our coordinates into a void that stubbornly refuses to answer. We send golden records into the abyss, desperately hoping to join a galactic community, completely unaware that we might be the only ones left alive to hear the echo. The great cosmic absence forces us to accept that the silence of space is not just a passive physical trait of the vacuum. It is active, profound evidence. It is either evidence of total emptiness or evidence of a lethal cosmic trap that no one survives. But as we will soon explore, there is a third, infinitely more disturbing reason why billions of advanced civilizations might be hovering in the dark, choosing to remain absolutely, perfectly quiet. Imagine walking alone through an ancient pitch-black forest in the dead of night. You're completely blind, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction. You know instinctively that you are not alone in these woods. You know there are other living things moving silently between the trees, but you cannot see them, and they cannot see you. Suddenly, you hear a sharp snap of a twig nearby. What do? Do you turn on a flashlight? Do you loudly call out into the dark to see if the unseen entity is a friend? Of course not. Your deepest, most primal evolutionary survival instincts immediately take over. You freeze, you hold your breath, and you remain absolutely, perfectly silent. You do this because you cannot know the intentions of whatever is out there in the dark. And in this environment, revealing your location is an enormous risk. Now, take that primal terrestrial fear and scale it up to the incomprehensible size of the Milky Way galaxy. This brings us to the most chilling, psychologically devastating solution to the great silence ever conceived, the dark forest theory. For decades, humanity has looked up at the night sky, pointed our massive radio telescopes at the billions of stars, and assumed that the deafening silence we hear is simply proof of our total isolation. We have comforted ourselves with the belief that the cosmos is an empty, lifeless graveyard. But the dark forest theory violently flips this assumption on its head. It suggests that the great silence of the universe is not a result of emptiness. The silence is a deliberate, calculated survival strategy. The universe behaves exactly like that dark forest at night. It is not empty. It is overwhelmingly crowded, teeming with highly advanced civilizations that are absolutely terrified of each other. To understand why an unimaginably advanced, godlike civilization would cower in the cosmic dark, we have to look at the cold, unforgiving mathematics of interstellar game theory. Imagine an ancient alien empire detects a faint, unusual radio signal emanating from a distant star system. They now face an impossible existential dilemma. If they respond and reach out to establish friendly contact, they instantly reveal their exact coordinates in the cosmos, but they have absolutely no way of knowing the true intentions or the capabilities of the civilization they are contacting. Is this new species peaceful and curious, or are they a violent expansionist empire that views all other life as a resource to be harvested? Because the physical distances in space are so unfathomably vast, the speed of light acts as an unbreakable barrier to real-time communication. A single message could take hundreds or thousands of years to arrive, and a reply would take just as long. You cannot negotiate. You cannot build a relationship or read their diplomatic cues. Trust is fundamentally, mathematically impossible to establish. Furthermore, even if the other civilization seems peaceful right now, what will they become in 10,000 years? They might rapidly develop new technologies that completely threaten the older civilization's existence. In a universe where resources are finite and competition is an inevitable law of nature, the safest strategy is always to assume the worst. When trust is impossible and survival is on the line, the logic of the dark forest dictates a horrific mandate. From the perspective of any advanced species, the safest strategy is to eliminate all potential threats before they ever have the chance to become actual threats. You do not wait to see if they are friendly. You do not broadcast a greeting. You strike first, you strike hard, and you ensure that your civilization is the only one that survives. In this cosmic arena, every single civilization is a hunter hiding in the trees, armed to the teeth, listening desperately for the faint sound of someone else stepping on a twig. Everyone is potentially hostile, and anyone who reveals themselves immediately becomes a target. This means that the absolute dead silence of space is not a passive characteristic of the physical vacuum. It is an active weapon. Natural selection, playing out on a terrifying cosmic scale, heavily favours silence. Think about the implications of this evolutionary filter. The naive civilizations that proudly broadcast their presence, the ones that build massive glowing megastructures, or excitedly leak their radio waves out into the dark in search of friends are quickly and violently exterminated. The only civilizations that survive the brutal gauntlet of cosmic history are the ones that learn to stay perfectly, flawlessly quiet. The galaxy fills up with ancient, hyper-advanced empires that are permanently hiding from each other. And ironically, the more crowded the universe becomes with life, the more dangerous broadcasting becomes, because the chances of at least one hostile predator intercepting your signal skyrockets. This forces us to completely re-evaluate the deep psychological horror of the physical vacuum we explored earlier. We know that the physical environment of space is an acoustic void, fundamentally incapable of carrying sound waves, which forces the isolated human brain into a state of severe paranoia and internal noise amplification. We plunge into the quiet, and our minds violently invent phantom threats in the dark. But if the dark forest theory is real, this profound paranoia is entirely justified. The cosmic quiet is not just a lack of vibrating air molecules. It is a heavy, suffocating blanket of interstellar dread. The universe is physically silent because it lacks an atmospheric medium, but it is technologically silent because anything that makes noise does not survive. Those unseen civilizations lurking out there in the dark aren't just existing peacefully. They are engaged in a state of eternal, agonizing paranoia, constantly watching the skies, analyzing every electromagnetic anomaly, and waiting for the terrifying moment they are finally discovered. The great silence is not the peaceful quiet of an empty room. It is the deafening tension of billions of conscious beings holding their breath, terrified to make a sound. The silence is not emptiness, it is fear. When you truly internalize this concept, the night sky transforms from a majestic canvas of stars into a sprawling, active minefield. Every dark patch of space between the glowing galaxies might be hiding an empire that has perfected the art of remaining completely undetectable. And as we sit down here on our tiny, fragile blue marble, staring up into the abyss, we have to confront the horrifying reality of what we have been doing for the last century. We are not hunters, we are the prey, and we have been wandering blindly through the dark forest, screaming at the top of our lungs. What if the universe is silent because anything that makes noise doesn't survive? If the chilling logic of the dark forest theory holds true, then the absolute dead quiet of the cosmos is not a natural phenomenon, but a brutal, heavily enforced law of cosmic natural selection. It dictates that the universe is overwhelmingly crowded with ancient godlike civilizations that have survived for millions of years by adhering to one strict, unbreakable rule: stay hidden. In a vast arena where resources are finite, where the speed of light makes diplomacy impossible, and where you can never truly know the intentions of an alien empire, the only rational survival strategy is to remain perfectly undetectable. Every advanced species is a silent hunter, lurking in the shadows, listening to the void, and instantly annihilating anyone foolish enough to reveal their position. In this terrifying scenario, the silence we hear when we point our telescopes at the stars is not the peaceful quiet of an empty room. It is the deafening, agonizing tension of 1 billion heavily armed empires holding their breath. Against this backdrop of cosmic paranoia, we must shift our gaze back to our own fragile blue marble. When we compare the terrifying, calculated silence of the universe to the actions of human beings over the last century, a horrifying realization sets in. We are doing the exact opposite of hiding. We are screaming at the top of our lungs. For more than a century, ever since the invention of radio and television, humanity has been proudly and ignorantly leaking our presence out into the dark. Every radar installation scanning our skies every television broadcast beamed across our continents, and every radio transmission has been steadily radiating outward from Earth at the speed of light. We have created a rapidly expanding sphere of human noise, a chaotic electromagnetic bubble that currently has a radius of about 100 light years. Within that sprawling 100 light year bubble, there are thousands of stars that have already been bathed in the artificial radiation of human civilization. We often comfort ourselves with the physics of the inverse square law. We know that as these radio waves travel vast distances, their signal strength drops exponentially, becoming incredibly faint by the time they reach a star 50 light years away. We assume they simply fade into the static background noise of the universe, rendering us practically invisible. But this is a deeply arrogant assumption. We are judging the capabilities of potential alien hunters based entirely on our own primitive human technology. An ancient Type 2 or Type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale would possess computational systems the size of entire solar systems. To a civilization of that magnitude, isolating our faint, fading television broadcasts from the cosmic microwave background wouldn't be impossible. It would be trivial. They wouldn't just hear the noise, they would instantly recognize it as the undeniable chaotic signature of a young, unhidden technological species. But our accidental leakage is not even the most terrifying part of our story. We are not just casually whispering in the dark. We have actively, deliberately turned on a spotlight and shouted our exact coordinates into the abyss. In 1974, a team of astronomers, including Carl Sagan and Frank Drake, used the massive Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico to intentionally fire a highly concentrated, powerful radio transmission directly toward the globular star cluster Messier 13. This wasn't a random burst of static. It was a meticulously crafted message consisting of 1,679 binary digits, engineered to be easily decoded by any intelligent species that intercepted it. When decoded, this message reveals a staggering amount of highly sensitive information. It contains the double helix structure of our human DNA, the specific chemical building blocks of our biology, a visual representation of the human figure, and a detailed map of our solar system highlighting Earth's exact position. We didn't just say hello. We literally beamed a biological and technological weak point analysis directly into the void. This dangerous hubris did not stop there. We have repeatedly hurled physical artifacts into the dark, explicitly designed to be found. The Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft, launched in the early 1970s, both carry gold-plated aluminum plaques displaying the figures of a human, man and woman, alongside a highly specific cosmic map. A few years later, we launched the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft, which carry the famous golden records. These 12-inch gold-plated copper discs contain greetings in 55 different human languages, sounds of our weather, our music, and our brain waves. But the most dangerous piece of information etched into both the Pioneer plaques and the Voyager golden records is the pulsar map. Pulsars are rapidly rotating, highly magnetized neutron stars that emit regular, incredibly precise pulses of radiation, acting as permanent cosmic lighthouses. By triangulating the position of our Sun relative to 14 of these specific pulsars, we handed any advanced civilization a permanent, mathematically perfect treasure map that leads directly to our front door. If the dark forest is real, these well-intentioned messages are undeniably the most dangerous things humanity has ever created. We have told anyone listening exactly where we live, exactly what we are made of, and exactly how primitive our technology currently is. We have done all of this under a fatal, uniquely terrestrial assumption. We blindly assume that any civilization advanced enough to travel between the stars will naturally be peaceful, curious, and benevolent. Jimmy Carter, the United States President, at the time of the Voyager launch, recorded a message for the Golden Record stating that we hope to survive our time so we may live into theirs, and that we wish to join a community of galactic civilizations. This perfectly encapsulates our naive, romantic hope. We desperately want the universe to be a welcoming community. But what if that assumption is entirely, catastrophically wrong? We don't even have to look to the stars to understand why. We only need to look at our own brutal evolutionary history. On Earth, whenever two human cultures separated by vastly different technological levels met, the result was almost never peaceful coexistence. The encounter consistently resulted in the violent conflict, conquest, exploitation, or total destruction of the less advanced group. Our history is soaked in the blood of the weaker side. Why would we assume that an alien species, an entity forged in the ruthless, uncompromising fires of cosmic natural selection, would behave with the empathy of a saint? They might view other intelligent life not as peers to be befriended, but as future threats to be neutralized, or biological resources to be harvested. We are projecting our most optimistic, naive human desires onto apex predators we cannot even begin to comprehend. We are acting exactly like lost children, wandering blindly through a pitch-black forest full of unseen, heavily armed hunters, screaming at the top of our lungs to see if anyone wants to play. This terrifying reality has not gone unnoticed by the scientific community. The great silence of the universe, paired with our reckless noise, has sparked a fierce, desperate debate among the world's leading astrophysicists and deep space researchers. There is a rapidly growing faction of scientists who are absolutely horrified by our ongoing attempts to contact the stars. They are urgently calling for an immediate global moratorium on all deliberate cosmic transmissions. They argue that broadcasting our location is an inherently irreversible act. Once a powerful radio wave leaves our atmosphere, it detaches from Earth and travels outward at the speed of light for eternity. You cannot recall it. You cannot apologize for it. You cannot take it back. When small independent organizations beam the Beatles across the universe or send targeted messages to potentially habitable exoplanets, they are unilaterally making a decision that endangers every single human being on Earth, as well as all of our future descendants. They are flipping a cosmic coin with human extinction on the line, simply because they refuse to accept that the absolute silence of the universe might be a severe, blaring warning. The most chilling aspect of this debate is that the faction calling for silence understands the ultimate consequence of the dark forest. If a civilization is millions of years older than us, a conflict with them would not be a war. It would be pest control. We wouldn't even see the weapon that ends us. It could be a relativistic kill vehicle travelling at a fraction of the speed of light, striking our planet with the force of 1 million nuclear warheads before we even registered its approach. It could be a biological agent engineered to perfectly exploit the DNA sequence we so proudly beamed from Arecibo. If we draw the attention of a hunter in the dark forest, our end will be swift, absolute, and perfectly silent. As we sit down here on our fragile world, gazing up at the majestic canvas of the night sky, we must confront the paralysing dread of what we have already done. The Voyager spacecraft has already pierced the boundary of interstellar space, carrying our golden invitation deeper into the eternal dark. Our radio waves have already washed over thousands of alien suns, rippling through the void long after the humans who broadcast them have turned to dust. We have already snapped the twig. We have already shouted into the black trees. The terrifying truth is that it is already too late to be quiet. The silence we are listening to right now might no longer be the silence of an empty, lifeless cosmos. It might be the heavy, deafening silence of a predator turning its head in our direction, locking onto our exact coordinates and silently preparing to strike. We have journeyed through the physical vacuum of space, a place where cataclysmic supernovas and colliding galaxies violently erupt without a single whisper. We have explored the fragile breaking point of the human mind, unravelling in the crushing hallucinatory grip of sensory void collapse when separated from the comforting noise of Earth. We have entertained the deeply unsettling fringe theories that our entire reality might be a muted simulation, designed to save computational power by keeping the cosmic void acoustically dead. And we have stared directly into the terrifying technological graveyard of the Fermi paradox, confronting the chilling logic of the dark forest, where remaining perfectly quiet is the only way to survive an arena full of unseen predators. As we pull all of these threads together, we are forced to confront the ultimate existential realization. We stand on the shores of an unimaginably vast, dark cosmic ocean, hurling our golden records and our radio waves into the abyss, desperately waiting for an echo that stubbornly refuses to return. We look up at the night sky, completely surrounded by 200 billion trillion stars, and we are met with an absolute, heavy and unbroken quiet. But perhaps the greatest and most dangerous mistake humanity can make is believing that this silence is merely an absence. We tend to think of silence as a lack of data, a blank space on a canvas, or simply an environment waiting to be filled with our noise. But when you look at the sheer scale of the cosmos, the history of the universe, and the violent evolutionary laws that govern life, a much darker truth emerges. Silence in space is not passive. It is not a blank slate. It is active, profound, and undeniable evidence when we point our most advanced telescopes into the dark and hear absolutely nothing. We are not receiving zero data. We are receiving the most important, terrifying message the universe could possibly send us. That message is forcing us to accept that our reality is governed by one of three horrifying truths, and the ultimate unresolved terror of human existence is that we still do not know which of these three realities we are currently living in. The first reality is that the silence is active evidence of total, absolute emptiness. It is the terrifying possibility of the rare earth and the great filter. In this reality, the quiet we hear is the sound of a sterile universe. It means that the delicate, chaotic leap from dead chemistry to intelligent spacefaring life is a cosmic anomaly so mathematically improbable that it essentially only happened once. It means the silence we hear is actually the graveyard echo of billions of other civilizations that arose, developed technology, and then inevitably violently destroyed themselves before they could ever reach the stars. If this is our reality, then we are the only flickering candle in a dark, infinite room. The silence is a heavy, suffocating reminder of our own fragility, warning us that if we fail to survive our own technological adolescence, our species will vanish, and the universe will permanently, eternally return to an unbroken quiet. The second reality is that the silence is active evidence of our own severe biological limitation. It is the perception limitation theory. In this reality, the universe is not an empty graveyard at all. It is a deafeningly loud, chaotic, and overcrowded stadium. The cosmos is heavily saturated with the magnificent chatter of ancient, post-biological empires, quantum data streams, and galaxy-spanning communications that completely bypass our primitive understanding of physics. But because we are trapped inside fragile biological vehicles that evolved only to hear atmospheric vibrations and see a microscopic sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, we are fundamentally, hopelessly deaf. We are sitting right in the middle of the greatest interstellar network in existence, entirely oblivious to the unimaginable noise happening right in front of our faces. If this is our reality, the terror comes from our absolute insignificance and our inability to ever truly comprehend the grand, majestic machinery of the real universe. But it is the third reality that brings the most paralyzing dread. The silence might be active evidence of something out there in the dark, deliberately choosing to hide. This is the unforgiving reality of the dark forest. In this scenario, the universe is teeming with life, but the quiet of the cosmos is heavily enforced by the brutal laws of cosmic natural selection. The absolute dead silence is the agonizing, deafening tension of billions of hyper-advanced empires holding their breath, terrified of making a sound. It means the night sky is not a peaceful canopy of stars, but a sprawling, active minefield of apex predators who have survived for millions of years by instantly annihilating anyone foolish enough to reveal their position. If this is our reality, then our century of loudly broadcasting our exact coordinates into the void is the most catastrophic mistake any species has ever made. And the silence we are listening to right now is simply the quiet of the hunter slowly taking aim, emptiness, limitation, or a predator hiding in the dark. These are the only three answers to the great cosmic silence. As we continue to build our cities, argue over our terrestrial politics, and blindly launch our probes deeper into the void, we do so under the shadow of this immense, unyielding mystery. The universe will eventually burn out. Trillions of years from now, the last stars will die, the black holes will evaporate, and the cosmos will succumb to the heat death, entering a state of absolute eternal darkness and perfect, unbreakable silence. But until that final day arrives, we are left standing on this tiny blue marble, staring out into the abyss, waiting for a response. The final lingering terror of our existence is not just that the universe is silent. It is that we still do not know which of these three realities is the true reason for the quiet, and we have absolutely no idea which of them is the most dangerous. What if the universe is silent because anything that makes noise doesn't survive? Imagine the loudest, most cataclysmic event you can possibly comprehend. Billions of stars are burning, dying, and violently colliding across the cosmos, but none of them are calling out. The real fear isn't just that we might be alone in the dark. It is the creeping realization that the silence of the cosmos is not an accident. It is a fundamental law of reality, and everyone else might be staying quiet on purpose.